Thank you, and welcome everyone. I wanted to first start by giving you a little bit of context on our company before I talk about AI in the enterprise and sort of the things we've learned, the things that people are talking about today. For those that don't know, Moveworks is an AI co-pilot that helps organizations basically transform how they operate. It enables employees to remove friction from being able to find and access information, from being able to automate tasks and be able to get support, IT, HR, facilities, and the like. We've worked with over 350 companies now and serving over 5 million users on the platform. So a lot of what I'm going to share today is not just hypothetical. It's context that we bring to the table based on these deployments that we have. And one of the benefits of having this scale is I get to talk to CIOs and CHROs on a weekly basis about what they're doing with AI, what's working, what's failing, and really what they want to get out of it. And that's the topic of today's conversation, and really talk about how agentic fits into everything that we're hearing and everything that we're seeing. So, if you think about the problem space that many of your companies are probably also tackling today, is removing the friction from your employees' day. Now, we live in a frictionless economy. We use DoorDash and Uber, and we found ways to do that on the consumer side, but it's still been very tricky for organizations to do this inside their sort of four walls. And so when you look at this, let's talk about a few examples of why there is a lot of friction inside these organizations. If you look on the right, there's a lot of systems of record. You have ITSMs, you have CRMs, you have ATSs, you have all the likes. And employees need access to information. They also need questions answered. They also need to run automations, or they need some task fulfilled. And so knowing where to go. If I'm looking up something about a customer, do I go to Gainsight or do I go to ServiceNow? If I want to update an OKR, is that in Workday or is that in SuccessFactors? There's all sorts of places that people go. Sometimes you need an approval. Sometimes you have to fill out a form before you do the second step. And so that's what's creating a lot of friction, and that's where people are looking at new ways to really deliver on solving that core problem. Now, what we're also trying to achieve is much smoother operations. So when you think about this, not just in these atomic use cases, but when you think about broader scale problems like employee onboarding or running a manufacturing process, there are many steps and there's much complexity in that journey that the employees go through or that the teams have to go through to do their job. Now, we know this has been inefficient, and you've seen the numbers. There's a lot of opportunity for us to use AI to help organizations really deliver on this promise of improving employee productivity. But there's also these skyrocketing costs when it comes to support, when it comes to what companies invest in to facilitate these types of services for their employees. And I think it's not just employees that we're focusing on. We're thinking about the entire business and how the business is run. That really starts to form the narrative of what we're going to talk about a lot today, which is about the business processes. I think what we've seen and what we're all here seeing, I think, throughout this conference, is that everyone is now using AI to solve every possible problem that we have in our businesses, in our society. And what we're finding is that with the new kind of capabilities that we've seen with AI explode on the scene, many companies are using tools like ChatGPT to help employees be more efficient, maybe write memos, and find information using RAG systems that allow them to peer into lots of different documents. And some of these things have been working, some of them have been not working, and some are sort of in between. And I think that one thing that we've seen, what I'll talk about now, is sort of CIOs see the ROI of these different use cases quite differently. And so when we talk about ROI, company leaders tend to look at it from two different perspectives. There is this sort of weak ROI, and then there is the strong ROI. And when you talk about employee productivity, it turns out that's considered weak ROI. There's a reason for that. It's because when I make myself more productive, maybe saving 3 hours a week, that kind of leaves with me when I leave the company. Whereas when you think about true AI transformation, companies are looking at how they can create transformation that's a multiplicative effect on productivity, not just for one person, but for the whole organization, something that endures past the tenure of one individual, something that will be benefiting everyone, not just the person who leverages or adopts a particular generative use case. And so there is a common thing I hear from CFOs when they talk about this with us, and they say something to the effect of, hey, look, if all you're delivering is employee time savings, and it's 3 hours a week, it doesn't change how I run the company or what my cost basis is. And the only beneficiaries of 3 hours a week is the employee's dog and the back nine of their favorite golf course, right? So it's sort of one of these cynical views that you have to think about what really can you embed, what can you build if you're a developer, if you're an architect, that will actually change how the company operates. Okay, so given that, this should all be pretty easy, right? It should be pretty straightforward. We should be seeing lots of success. Of course, we're not seeing that. And you're seeing in the news all the time, where is the ROI? Why aren't these AI initiatives succeeding? 2023 was the year of demos, right? And people were buying everything under the sun to show off what they could do with this new LLM-based sort of technology. And now what they're finding is that a lot of these things aren't delivering on the scope, on the alignment, or on the goals that they set out to deliver. And that's because the problem space is much harder than we all tend to think it is when you get into the details. To do this, what's been missing and what's now starting to emerge is the idea of an agentic reasoner. And I know you're probably hearing agentic all throughout this conference, but I'm going to talk about what an agentic reasoner is and how it works and why it's so transformational and important to delivering strong ROI in your company. So if you think about what LLMs can do now, is they're very good at many things, generating content as I talked about, but they're also really good at action planning. When you give it a question, you give it a series of goals, it can actually break that down and come up with a plan, and then provided that it has access to core systems, it can then execute against that plan, observe its results and the feedback from those actions, and then replan and re-execute. It's all happening in very fast time scale, but it allows these organizations to tackle much more complex workflows. And so being able to do multiple steps, being able to handle the payload of these actions and bring it back, and then observe the response is really what's been missing inside the enterprise, and why this kind of architecture, and if you're at the scale that we are talking to lots of organizations, this is now becoming the must-have capability that organizations want to deploy within their kind of environments. And what sets us apart is its ability to handle conversations, but use cases that are emergent. Use cases that come about when someone says, hey, I want to know this, this, and this, that weren't premeditated, that weren't based on some architect building some workflow about a use case that they assumed you wanted, right? And so you can do things like, you can say, hey, which of our employees live in Las Vegas? I want to take them all out to dinner. What's the policy and how much can I spend? And that requires lots of different steps that the system has to figure out to look up, do a RAG call, figure out the policy, then come back and do some mathematics, and then give you the answer that you're looking for. And that's where we're seeing the opportunity. Getting more specific, if you look at different domains, different areas, and we talk about this business transformation, you're seeing things like with HR, it's not just checking the balance, but it's also then submitting the request and then actually going one step further and emailing your manager that you're going to take that time off. Now, if I were advising this person, you should ask your manager first before taking the time off, but I think everyone has their own process around that. But the point there is, for sales and marketing, agentic systems can now enable sales teams to say, hey, look, of these people in the organization, I want to schedule a customer call. When is everyone free? And give me some options. Today, that would take the work of an assistant, or that would take plenty of time for the individual to go navigate and do. And you don't want your sellers spending time doing that, calendaring work. You want your sellers on the phone. You want your sellers responding to customer requests and servicing them. So we're seeing these as sort of the canonical types of use cases that agentic is starting to really solve. Now, how does this work? I'm going to work through a couple of slides and give you sort of more granular detail on where some of the challenges have been for organizations. But if you think about how this works, is the employee sends a message. And the message might contain a request, it might contain a search, it might contain a set of goals that they have. And the reasoning engine then kicks into gear. It then has to then look at what the steps are that are necessary, what systems does it have access to, and it starts to make a plan. Once it creates that plan, it then calls a series of plugins. And I'll go into the work you have to do to make that happen automatically. But the plugins then go and talk to these core systems of record, right? Your HRIS, your CRM, your ATS, your IDAM systems, your provisioning systems. And it comes back with different pieces of data. Remember, all these plugins aren't the same. Sometimes it's getting a status. Sometimes it's checking some inventory. Other times it's pulling in a document or several documents. Sometimes it's getting a list of results from another system. And so then the agentic reasoner takes all that, has to make sense of it, and has to then decide, is that going to resolve this issue, or do I need to go back and do this loop again? And so it's this agentic loop of looking at things, coming back around, and then resolving it. And the way that it resolves it, it generates a response, gives the user the answer, provides citations, has guardrails, make sure there's no hallucinations. And that's how we sort of can then get to the end state that the user feels like, hey, I've done something, it's worked, and it's really, really fast. Now, when you think about models to do this, there's many different choices. There's ensembling of models to do this. It's not one model that does it all. And when you think about the advancements in models, like GPT-4o, great model, can service a use case like this, but a model like GPT-01 won't do as good of a job, simply because when you set out to figure out how to solve this, you don't know all the information, because you haven't actually collected all the information from all the subsystems that are out there. So it actually is an open-ended problem that actually doesn't work that well with you sort of these very smart models, but need, on the other hand, all the information for them to make a good choice or good judgment. So there's a lot more there, but let's dig in a little bit more. Now, we were talking about agents. I think everyone knows what agents are, but they're these sort of autonomous systems that can plan, that can act, that can reason and observe, and then come back and sort of deliver results. So given that, why has this been so difficult? Why has the agentic narrative been a lot of talk, but not a lot of action? And we've had to see this in action with our 5 million users to figure out where these things break down and why they break down. So if you think about a traditional toolkit in a sort of environment that you have today, sort of pre-AI, you have your app talking to some framework, and then it's talking to an API. Pretty straightforward. Let's use a use case. Let's say I've got a conference booking app, and I'm looking at it, and there's a drop-down. I look at the drop-down. It then gives me the options for the conference rooms. There's a conference room called White Fox, and then White Fox gets translated by the app into a code or an ID that then goes into the API. That's very easy when your application is a parametric application that has all of that logic encoded. But when you turn this into a conversation, and it's more of that being the input, like book the White Fox conference room, now you've got more complexity, because translating that into the actual API call breaks all the time unless you actually can build the right architecture to do this. And I call this the demo devils. You ever built one of these use cases that works for you, and then you give it to your manager, and then they try something and it doesn't work, and it breaks, and you're like, darn it, like, what the heck? And it's these small, subtle shifts in the language patterns that throws off the logic that you've created to then dump the right data into the API. One of our customers, we see this play out all the time, because people will say, where's Michael Jackson? I can't find John Lennon. Is Tupac on this floor? And they name their conference rooms after dead musicians. And so the reality is it's super hard to figure out like what it is you mean. There's context. The reasoner has to plan. It has to think about what options there are, what resources might be called Tupac or Michael Jackson. And so there is a lot more under the hood when you think about this business transformation, which, by the way, which is why a lot of people just do employee productivity and they leave it at that and they sort of move on, right? But this is where the real money is. This is where the real opportunity is. So when you think about this and you think about an agentic automation engine, what you'll not only have is the reasoner, but you will have several other components that you have to build. One of them is the manifest generator, and that's something that we've coined where the system actually looks at the query and decides what plugins are most suitable. Today, most of the large Copilot sort of providers out there do not do automatic plugin selection because they haven't solved the manifest generator problem. When someone says, what's the status of my PR? All of you are probably thinking pull request because we're engineers. But for someone in procurement, that's a purchase request. So if you think about what the agentic reasoner has to do is it has to break that down and be like, okay, given this language, there's actually several places I have to go look to see if I can find an answer relevant to this individual, relevant to their role, their title, what permissions they have, and it pulls that together. The plugin executor deals with all the complexity of the fact that you might get a status bit from one system, you might get a table back from another system, you might get a list from another system, you might get a document back from from a fourth system. It has to then navigate all those different content sources and buffer that, and then decide, based on a set of steps and actions that are required as part of business process, how to go about leveraging that, right? You might need an approval, you might need certain wait states, you might need different things to happen before you can actually complete the request. Now, it's actually much more complicated than this, and we won't have time today to go through it, but our agentic reasoner, now that we've sort of fully built it out, has 4 types of memory and 3 types of planning loops that are continuously being leveraged for all sorts of different edge cases and use cases where you're pulling in data from hundreds of different systems to solve a simple thing like, what's the status of my PR? And it, again, sounds simple, but it can very easily get complex as you want to bring all this to bear. Now, underneath this are the plugins, and there's also different types of plugins. Some are simply triggered by third-party systems, and it works the other way around, but the plugins are then alerting the system to say, hey, this is what I found. You'll have slot resolvers, like what items are expected in this API, and how can I reason against that and be able to pull that into the API according to the conversation. I'll give you an example. I can say, my colleague Jake is over there, hey, can you assign this task in Asana to Jake? Great, a simple AI system can do that. It can work through the API. But if I say I'm going on leave, and can you assign all my tasks to Jake, most systems will fail. Because they don't then know, okay, given that query, I first have to do a search for all Bhavin's tasks in Asana, pull that in, store that in memory, and then iterate through that and assign every one of those to Jake. So this is where language complexity and a small nuance change creates infinite complexity unless you have an architecture like this. You of course have policy validators to ensure that you have the right permissions, that you're only seeing the right data, and that you're using the right tokens there, and then a variety of sort of orchestration and actions that come with that, and knowing about them and how they behave to know when to trigger them and when not to trigger them. So lots there, but I think the point is this, and I'll go to this slide, is that as you think about what companies really want to do, what CFOs really want to see, what your IT leaders and your HR leaders and folks really want to do in terms of AI transformation, they're looking at things like this. Again, not just helping your employees save 3 hours from better RAG search, but really being able to transform how things happen on the talent team. How they evaluate candidates, how they can respond to candidates, how they can query the status of a candidate approval flow. Being able to self-serve benefits and administration. That's been a topic that we've all talked about for some time, but being able to allow employees to check in on payroll, their commissions, why something was deducted and not, and be able to actually get the values from those deep databases that you have inside your organization. And then also on the HR thread, because this is an HR example, also using this to develop more use cases around employee culture and doing surveys and getting feedback and allowing employees to express what they want in real time and giving them feedback or results or sort of answers from that. So you take all this and you come back to, I think, what we started this conversation talking about, which is the business outcomes are the ones that really matter. Whether it's driving operational excellence, whether it's enhancing employee experience, or it's accelerating the business transformation itself, enabling your organization to do a lot more. Without agentic, you'll be left with just the weak ROI opportunities and use cases. But if you want the strong ROI, you've got to take this agentic approach. And this is now a very large emerging category, but hopefully today's conversation helped you get a peek into the complexity, but also the power of a system like that. So anyways, thank you very much.